Good day, everyone, and thank you for attending our symposium on new and emerging online threats. My name is Matt Richardson. I am the Senior Advisor for Child Sexual Exploitation and Child Sex Trafficking with the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative, and I will be our moderator for today. And we'll open up by handing off to the panelists so that we can do an introduction before we get started with our questions and answers. Jeannie, we'll start with you, please.
Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here. I'm Jeannie Parker, and I'm Vice President of Product and Analysis with SpiderWatch.
Thank you, Jeannie. And we'll come over to you, Simon. You're on mute.
Matt, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. Simon Bailey. I'm the Director of Strategic Engagement for Child Rescue Coalition and a former Chief Constable in the UK and the National Policing Lead for Child Protection.
Thank you, Simon. And we'll come over to you now, Dawn, please.
Hello, I'm Dawn Hawkins. I serve as the EO at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation based in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Dawn. And over to you, Andy.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me to partake in this. My name's Andy Briarcliffe. I'm an online harms professional with a specific focus in online child protection, and I've worked in this environment for 14 plus years.
Well, thank you, Andy, and a big thank you to each of you on our panel today for joining us with your busy schedules. The considerable amount of expertise and experience you bring to this conversation is something I've been looking forward to. So with no further ado, we'll get started. And I'm going to start our first question, which will be, we're looking at new and emerging trends, and we have seen a significant uptick in financially motivated sexual or sextortion targeting boys and young men. And I'll start this one off with you, Dawn, if I may. Can you share a little bit about what you're seeing at the higher level with respect to this emerging crime?
Yeah, financial sextortion. This is really has grown. And NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, their numbers have more than doubled in just year over year, the last 3 years. What we're seeing is this effort generally to reach out to mostly boys, but it happens to both, but boys have become the increased target. Somebody reaches out to them and entices them to create child sexual abuse material or self-generate nude images and to send it along. Often the person is disguised as another girl, a peer, someone else. They send them images as well, and so there's a grooming aspect here. The problem is that after the images are sent by the victim, often the predator is asking for money and threatening, if the money doesn't come, to expose them, to send those images to their entire network, to their family, to their schools, and elsewhere. And this has become a huge problem. And what we're seeing is largely, it could be they're asking for immediate payment, they're asking for Cash App, they're asking for cryptocurrency, they're asking for gift cards, and it happens very quickly, often late at night. And so a lot of times we're seeing these young people feeling so helpless. And I've actually was just with a family this last weekend whose son died by suicide after a financial sextortion scheme. And I know 24 parents who have endured the same thing because it happens so quickly and these young people don't see a way out of it.
And one thing I understand about it is the speed at which these crimes occur from the point of contact to the suicide or the suicide attempt, which I would suppose.
Yeah. Generally,
sorry, that hours?
Hours, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So not days, not weeks, not months, not years, which I suppose it'd be fair to say underscores the need for parents to be present and engaged in their child's life. So we notice if something's wrong and we can intervene, because time is of the essence, speed is key in these cases, right, Dawn?
Right. Also talking to our kids about if and when this happens to you, you don't feel helpless, feel like you can come tell us. Don't send the money, because it almost always just escalates to them demanding more and more money, more images. And so, oftentimes we as parents can't even be that involved. Like, we don't know what's happening necessarily at 11 p.m. or 1 a.m. if our kids kind of snuck their devices and they're still on it. But so if from a prevention standpoint, if we're having conversations with our kids about this is likely to happen, this is a growing problem, and here's what to do if it happens to you. It's one of the best intervention tactics.
So I love that response, Dawn. Fantastic. Be proactive and look at the picture holistically and create the conditions where they know they can come to you. Because it's almost not if these things happen, it's when at some point. That's a great response. Anyone on the panel wish to add to Dawn's response to the question on financial sextortion?
Yeah, I think I would like to contribute a little bit to that. I think that, certainly technology plays a pivotal role in combating and thwarting online sexual extortation, against this extortion, and sometimes it's that real-time notification. And I think that for sure parental involvement, the parental mentoring, all of us play a pivotal role in this interaction with our children when it happens. But it's also really important to recognize that, AI and all of these things that have come into this space within this technology, is really opened the doors to a lot of this contact, even with our children, is not necessarily even something that they've even initiated. It's just an unsolicited contact with a child that might not even be an image that they even necessarily have sent. So I think, using the benefits of technology and these threat notifications and these real-time notifications, these early interventions, is involving parental, involvement in this is something that we really need to combat and really think about, moving forward. It's just everybody coming together to work. It's a collaboration.
Oh, I agree completely, Jeannie. And I'd add to that too, the responsibility of these tech platforms. If these tech, because you're exactly right. So often these solicitations come from strangers, and these tech platforms should not be allowing strangers to be just sending and communicating with young people directly. So not only the parental involvement and like the threat, but these tech companies, they have these indicators often about dangerous relationships, dangerous interactions, that they can also step up to help solve this problem. And frankly, they are not yet. So the UK has passed really good legislation. There's pending legislation in Canada and the US also, but we need them to be partners as well.
So technology is a part of the problem and it is a part of the solutions, but I'm hearing, and right. And now that's a really wonderful pivot point, because we happen to have our friend Andy on here who has some extensive experience working with Twitter, X, formerly Twitter. Andy, if I can actually just hand you the ball for a minute, how do you feel about what was just said? Is big tech doing enough? Do you have any suggestions if we had the CEOs on here right now for what they could be doing better now to help protect kids online, Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and great pieces there from everybody. Can I just first add that obviously my thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of the panel, are to all the parents and families of the victims that have unfortunately been caught up and have taken their lives, because of this. So obviously the first question is, can big tech or any tech, because we talk about big tech being the social media, but actually some of this does happen on lower tech or medium tech as well. It happens in gaming, and it does happen in dating as well. So it's just that big tech has more users. Can big tech do more? Yes, but in fact, when you're looking at some of this, there's sometimes the initial connections are actually legal. There's nothing stopping someone reaching out and saying, hey, do you want to be my friend, and someone clicking yes. That's what social media is all about, to increase communication. So big tech do have to look at putting more safety measures in place. We have to allow people to interact and communicate with people, but how can big tech be sure that they know or don't know these individuals? And that's the hard bit, because sometimes the initial communication is perfectly legal chat for at least a little bit of it anyway. I think there's a lot more information sharing that tech can do between themselves. We do know there are certain projects going on that does allow a certain amount of information sharing, but that has to be improved. We do know there's a spike in certain parts of Africa that sextortion comes from, and a little bit of the Far East. So they need to be sharing that intelligence more. If there's a profile that seems to be being utilized over and over and again, why can't that be shared as quickly? Is that profile picture being utilized by multiple accounts? That would be an indicator. Certain words as well, and other things. But also, going back to talking about young people as well, we need to go back to education. Is the education that we're giving these people getting the right message across? Are we giving the right education to parents and adults as well? Because this is still continuing, and it's been continuing for many years. So is the message hitting the mark? Do we have to review what we do? And we need to take a look at society. So education to parents, adults, young people, education to tech, or at least improving tech, and then what is the response to law enforcement across the world, or whichever agency are looking at it.
Well, thank you very much, Mandy. Some great discussions already. This is fantastic. We'll go right to our next question. I'm going to bring this one to your way, Simon. Okay. When we hear about AI, there's a lot going on. There's the good stuff, the bad stuff. It's Skynet from Terminator. So I always say friend or foe, we don't know. But one thing we know is not so good about AI, and we all agree on this panel, is generative AI and the generation of CSAM with it. Simon, can you touch on that a bit and maybe explain a little bit about the implications that generative AI might have on the investigations with AI-generated CSAM?
Yes, gladly. And I think one of the most important messages to get across, and for all your viewers to appreciate now, is that this is not something that's going to be happening in the future. It's happening now. The software exists for offenders offline with the right software, putting in the right directions with the right tools, are now in a position where they can create, if they wish, millions of images of generative CSAM. And it's got to the point already where it's becoming almost impossible, if not impossible, to differentiate between, and I don't like using this word, but a real victim versus the image that's been put together through a generative CSAM tool. And I think this links really strongly into the whole issue of big tech's responsibility. I have to believe that the big technology companies, the startup companies, don't knowingly create an application, create software that they knowingly know is going to be used to facilitate abuse. But such is the scale of the abuse that we are now seeing being perpetrated as a result of technology. The big issue for me is that safety by design, having trust and safety woven into a company's business model, which is going to cost them, is simply not taking place. And the creation of software like Stable Diffusion, for example, is a brilliant example. The nudification applications is another great example. Can anybody tell me that a legitimate need or a legitimate use for a nudification app? Because I have to say, I can't think of one. And the fact is that we are now becoming increasingly aware of the sheer scale of the volume of generative images. We will shortly, in law enforcement, if not already, be overwhelmed by them. Time will be wasted trying to identify somebody in an image who is not a victim. And we need to start asking the questions in terms of where's the accountability around this. Dawn talked earlier on about legislation is thankfully coming. It's being used in Australia to great effect by Julian Grant, the E-Commissioner. The Online Safety Act is now here in the UK, and Ofcom are now starting to think about what that looks like. But I think legislation is going to have a role to play. But the challenge we have is these companies now are so powerful and so strong, and their hardware and their software is now so embedded in everyday life. I think that so many people are now prepared to ignore it, to turn a blind eye, and it's very difficult now to hold the companies to account for what they are not only creating, but supporting, fueling, and in some cases, actively encouraging with the way in which the algorithms work.
There's so much to talk about with that. I want to add a couple of like real examples, Simon, to what you're saying. We are tracking, there's 127 nudifying apps that we are tracking at Nicosi, and most of them were available on the Apple App Store and Google Play for ages 4 and up to download. So even if you have the built-in safety parental controls turned on, our elementary school kids were downloading these nudifying apps right from Apple, and they were creating thousands, millions of images of their classmates in just minutes. We did have a big campaign and a couple others, and Apple and Google have removed most of them, but they keep popping up again. Also, we've got Microsoft now. Microsoft owns GitHub, and GitHub is hosting a ton of the code that's being used to create AI-generated CSAM. And GitHub is doing nothing about it. They're allowing it. Our research, and it's like hard to know exactly because all of this is emerging, but our research is, and talks we've had with some of the big child protection organizations globally, is about 90% of the AI-generated CSAM is coming from code hosted by Microsoft's GitHub. These massive companies have to be held to account. They have to be part of this solution, and so far they're not really stepping up, like you said.
And just to make the point, there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that profit has been put before keeping children safe online.
100%. Just
no doubt about it.
Been since the dawn of the internet.
Okay. For what's worth, I'd agree. Jeannie, anything to add before we go to the next question?
The only thing that to add that scares me is the predatory response of how it just makes it easier to manipulate a victim, to normalize these behaviors for sextortion and the online sexual, it scares me what it does to and for our children.
We had to, Matt, we've got a lot of leaders, like I'm hearing members of Congress say this to me, media, like top people in the media also say, well, isn't AI generated CSAM so much better because a real child wasn't used in the creation? And I can't believe that we've got these leaders in high positions who think that, because there's so many things to unpack there. But if we're going to normalize sex with a child and we're going to sexualize children in mass, we're going to see so many more victims also, because people who are using this content they do act out. And I know that the research, there's not a ton of research about this, but the few that's out there show that users of child sexual abuse material often do act out in real life on real children. There's so many other concerns too with the proliferation of AI generated CSAM. So I just want to highlight this idea that I'm hearing again and again, that it's better if it's like this is going to solve the problem. There'll be less victims, because that's definitely not true.
I feel like we've all made very strong points on why that is not the case, and I hope members of Congress and other leaders out there are listening in today, because you're hearing from some of the best. That's a falsehood. And I'll add one thing to it. I'm moderating, but I have to add to Jeannie's points too, that with these notification apps, we've definitely seen it where those have been used in sextortion attempts. AI-generated images have been used to help catfish victims more effectively and more unbelievably. It's something that cannot go unabated. And the AI-generated CSAM, the falsehood that's better than a real victim. I don't know. There's a variety of studies on it. From the best of my memory, it's somewhere around half, 50 to 60% of those that consume CSAM will cross over and offend in real life, provided the opportunity to do so. So all we'd be doing is providing more content to work more minds to inspire more crimes. I think that those are really good points. Thank you all. Andy, we're about to move on. Did you have anything? I thought.
I was actually going. I mean, I agree with everything everybody says. I was just going to say we have obviously seen AI being utilised for bulk sextortion chat as well. It's not just images. You know, how to quickly create those conversations to mass groups of audience a lot quicker. So obviously there's a concern there, and obviously we're now seeing the videos as well. It's not just still images, and you know the videos are horrific as well. So yes, it's the whole overarching landscape is very concerning.
Andy, can I say something positive about that? I mean, we're seeing the exact same problem, and it'll be like one bad guy can now speak with hundreds of kids at once using, and the grooming is so much more intense and real and feels real. So horrible. But on the good side, there's a couple new tools I've learned about. One is so good called Street Grace. They've built the Gracie bot. They're out of Atlanta, but their law enforcement is using bots also to communicate with these predators and to be able to catch them also. And I just see it can be used for good just as well as just as much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry, Matt. I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, you know, we're talking about the very bad of AI and everything there, but, you know, let's look on the good that, you know, there is some AI detection capabilities, which is fantastic. Law enforcement and other agencies are using AI to catch the predators. So it's being used for the right reasons as well as the bad reasons.
What a great points. Fantastic. And we have another, I feel, a great pivot point here. Jeannie, I'd like to start you with this one, please. We were just talking about grooming tactics and ways that AI has evolved, victim selection, manipulation, and grooming tactics. Jeannie, if I could start with you. Grooming is as old as the crime itself. But how has grooming tactics and the grooming scenarios evolved, especially with the advent of AI? We touched on that. If we could maybe unpack that a little.
You know, I guess I'm always going to remain old school, you know, because grooming has always remained somewhat consistent. You know, I mean, the principles have always remained the same. AI has just, from my perspective, enhanced the way that it can get to the audience, that it can communicate with the victims, that it can communicate to get the message out for good and or for bad. You know, the whole grooming process for engaging with a child is for a predator to get something of a value that they want from that child, whether it's, you know, something of sexual in return or financial in gain. So the principles of grooming have never changed. I just think AI has enhanced the ability of how they can use that mechanism to get there. Just the way social media has enhanced the communication of now talking to children. You know, I started in a world when we were doing, you know, child sexual abuse material where people were printing off on a, you know, a DOS printer, you know, and then it evolved as we went, you know. So that's, I mean, obviously somebody else might have a different opinion, but that's kind of where I look at it from.
Well, I'll open up. Simon, I see your hand up there. Simon, take the floor, please.
Thank you, Matt, and please forgive my dog. So, Jeannie, what I have seen over time is, whilst the objectives of the offender have remained exactly the same, the speed at which the offenders are moving and the sheer volume of children that the offenders are engaging with has changed. And I have seen children engaged and exploited as a result of one question. Whereas before I saw grooming taking place over time, getting their confidence and trust, I've now seen offenders going from 0 to 60, bang, just like that. And we've had case after case here in the UK where thousands of children have been approached and maybe 10% have ended up being exploited. And that's all the groomer was interested in. They just wanted just to get another one and another one and another one. And the model, and I'm not going to describe what happened because I wouldn't want that tactic being used, because you'd say, well, to give us an example, Simon, but I don't want to use it. But it was one question which elicited one response, and that child was then exploited horrendously. And the challenge that we face is offenders now are just able to get in contact with hundreds of children just like that. They use the directories, they use their friendship circles, and bang, all of a sudden they're in a position to be able to exploit and abuse. And that's the difference that I've seen over the last decade. It is the speed, it's the scale, and if it was possible, it's the levels of depravity that are then taking place, and children being exploited and sextorted and blackmailed to then go and abuse a sibling. That is not unusual anymore, unfortunately. And that's what we are now having to deal with. And that's what technology is facilitating and supporting. And it goes back to it's that circular conversation, it's the role of tech. But actually, I've seen the tactics change, the approaches change, the speed change, and the volumes change.
Okay. And if we have nothing to add, I think we have another pivot point here. Thank you all for your comments on that. I think what I hear, and I understand to Jeannie's point, grooming is as old as the crime itself. The principles and the motivations are largely the same, but the speed, scale, and scope, the veracity of it, has changed in the modern era. Now, to your point, Simon, I think we probably, every one of us on this call, are aware that, unfortunately, the depravity level of the offender typologies has certainly increased over the years. I've been doing this myself for about 4 years, and I've seen drastic changes, not for the better. So I'm going to actually ask Dawn about this. Dawn, your perspective on any thoughts, theories you might have on why the depravity level is increasing. It's generally agreed that this is the case. And perhaps part B, what role you think exposure to extreme content, violent pornography, gore pornography, might have in fueling this escalation in the depravity levels of these offenders?
That's like an hour-long discussion I would love to give. But, what we're seeing too is 20 years into the internet age, 25 now, really, and the easy access to hardcore violent sexual content is, having such an impact. There's loads of research on the impact of pornography on the brain and escalation, desensitization. And so we could really get into that. I would argue that we've created a taste for extreme sexual violence, and our sexual templates have evolved because of that. And then with technology, we've opened up easy access. So those people who maybe would have had a barrier before of going and asking and trying to live out these fantasies that they now have that's fueled by pornography, now it's so easy to try to live that out in the digital realm, to find and target more vulnerable individuals to try to live it out with them even and meet them up in real life. I think it's the combination of hardcore violent pornography, which has in itself escalated. Pornography today is not Playboy. It is extreme violence. The front page, like research that just came out about a year ago, the front page of Pornhub, like the very first thing you see on Pornhub is almost entirely incest, racist, and like extreme sexual violence just on the homepage. So what also does that mean for our kids who are bumbling around and landing on that homepage? Because there's no barrier right now to like stop you really from getting that content. So we've got that exposure and then the easy access. And I want to kind of go back to you were talking about grooming on these on these platforms, but these platforms, there's like Roblox. I do have a big beef with Roblox. I think it's because I have young kids who are begging me every day to be on that platform. But it's also, like, at least in the United States, one of the number one places where predators are reaching and targeting kids. And Roblox knows it. They have 12.8 million kids on their platform under age 12 every single day. And yet they still allow adults to send and connect with kids on their platform, even though they largely know the ages of these kids. And then what we've got is it's just so easy. Tech has made it so easy. And then they'll move them over to Twitter, move them over to Snapchat. And I think all of that combined is why there's suddenly this huge explosion of exploitation, especially of children.
And Dawn, can I just build on that and there's only one point that you missed from my perspective. And Matt, it's the company's business models, how they operate and how they generate income by keeping people glued to the screen and on their particular site. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is you've got people viewing pornography, and the algorithms in the background are looking at what they're viewing, and then they're feeding them more and more and more.
And harder stuff.
And it's harder and harder. So one of the most commonplace search terms on porn sites is teen. So what's that then feeding? It's then feeding so the algorithm is saying, I've got somebody here that's interested in teen pornography. So it feeds it more and more and more and more. And people that have disclosed what their viewing habits have been, they are sitting there and they are simply ding, 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 because the algorithm's feeding them more and more and more and more. And as they view more, their sexual drive then becomes desensitized. They seek the harder core pornography. And the company's algorithms are driving these habits. And what we should all be really concerned about is young people accessing pornography. And what we are now seeing is young people accessing pornography and now viewing actors and thinking, this is what a normal relationship looks like. This is what good sex looks like. This is how women, for example, want to be treated. The UK's crime statistics for 2022 recorded, so it's just recorded, 107,000 incidents of child sexual abuse. 52% of that was child on child, being driven by the viewing of pornography, because it's young boys predominantly seriously sexually assaulting. This is not the grabbing of a buttock. These are serious sexual assaults, because that's what young men are now being fed. That's what young men now think this is normal. This is what girls want. And society's moral fabric, from my perspective, is being eroded by what we are now consuming, how we're consuming it, and how the technology sitting behind the platforms is feeding our desires and our searches, and it's then encouraging the activity that unfortunately we are seeing played out in real life.
Oh, we're seeing that exact same thing in the US. I mean, and the Department of Justice arrest records for child sexual abuse, 33% are other children who are acting out. And we know that's a way low number because we're not reporting it. Yep. And all of the research coming out on child harmful sexual behavior indicates it's usually exposure to pornography that's the most predominant factor to youth acting out on other youth. It's not, people think it's because the youth have been exploited or abused themselves and they're acting out again. That's very much not the case. And also, it's not just the pornography, the hardcore pornography websites, but it's also Twitter, Reddit, Discord that allow, those are also pornography websites. We need to think of them as that because they allow anything and anyone can upload anything. But it's also the algorithms driven by Meta and TikTok that are just so hypersexualized that have also, you talked about boys acting out, but also it's teaching our girls and our young boys to be victims. It's normalizing it in so many ways. Oh, there's so much to touch on there.
Yep.
Unfortunately, they're actually, I mean, and I think Matt would tend to agree with me, they're allowing that hardcore pornography on their platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so easy to find and it's disseminated.
Friends, I have something sad to tell you, but you'll be the first ones. We just lost a big lawsuit in the United States. We're suing X videos for hosting child sexual abuse material. And the judge just ruled that X videos is protected under a law in the US called the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which gives like blatant immunity to all tech platforms that have third parties uploading content. And the judge ruled that the search term toddler is neutral, which was the search term tied to our victims, our survivors' content. The court ruled that it's neutral search term. Like, who goes on and searches for toddler pornography expecting to get 18 plus, right? So also the very devastating thing is that case is lost and our courts are confused, and they are saying that tech is completely protected from receiving CSAM, which we'll challenge. But the good news here is we've got more ammo to fight for legislative change, because that's ridiculous, and everybody would agree.
If I may, Dawn, just following on from what you said, I completely agree. Anybody searching for the term toddler, I mean, that's just a red flag straight away. There's no explanation. But I was actually going to put a question to everybody. And I know we could discuss this in depth and over many hours, but should the search term teen just be completely banned on everything? And I'm curious, because actually the word teen technically is legal, but as we've just discussed, it's very, very dubious. So I'm curious, should that terminology be banned? I'm interested to hear everybody's view.
I'll hold my tongue a minute.
No, feel free. That's the idea.
And the easy answer is just to say yes, but I'm not going to say yes, simply because you put in young, you put in schoolgirl, you put in school uniform, you put in under 20. We've all been working in this ecosystem long enough to know the abbreviations of terms, how people chat, how they use emojis now increasingly. The banning of a term is not the answer. There is a far broader debate from my perspective in terms of, I believe, responsible adult content providers want age verification because the evidence is there, their content is harming children. They want that. It's a case of how we get to that point and how we bring about age verification that applies to everybody, because responsible providers could introduce it. Everybody knows what will happen. People using those responsible sites would then simply migrate to the less responsible, and the problem continues. So I think it's a huge problem. We could spend the whole of this webinar just talking about how we improve the issue of children accessing pornography. It's that big a problem, and it's reassuring, Dawn, from my perspective, that you are seeing similar statistics to what we've seen in the UK, but nobody wants to talk about it. And at some point, somebody's going to wake up and think, hold on a minute, more and more children are now perpetrators of sexual assault on other children. What is going on? And at that point, people will then start to ask the difficult questions.
Thank you, everyone. Go ahead, Dawn.
I would just add, I come from the perspective that no pornography is like healthy and good, that it all is causing harm. But nevertheless, the problem isn't, search term toddler is very problematic, but the real problem is that these websites allow anyone to upload anything at all. There's no verification of the age of all of those depicted, no verification of meaningful informed consent at all. So we have CSAM just exploding on these platforms, any platform that allows sexually explicit content, as well as, image-based sexual abuse and non-consensually shared content. So, really these websites, if you're Pornhub, you need to be verifying age and consent of every single person depicted.
Nope.
Oh no.
Everyone, Dawn messaged in the chat that her computer battery is low, so she will be back. She had to get her charger.
Well, and
I was just going to add, sorry, I was just going to add, obviously, what everybody's talking about as well, and Dawn, is obviously we have to take into account the re-victimization as well. You know, it's not just new videos and content that's being posted and shared. You know, it's videos that have been taken many years ago, and maybe those I'm going to call them survivors, victims. There's different terminology, you know, have got through it, but now they're being re-victimized again because the content is easily shared over and over again as well.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, we're getting into the home stretch here. I think if there's one thing I'd like to leave us with, if we've covered a lot of great topics today and some very interesting conversations and insights, and I, again, thank you kindly, each of you, for being here today. And I know our audience will be very happy with what they learned from the session. But if we leave it on a different note, if you were able, each of you, to tell parents, what is one thing that you can do to help keep your kids safer online than they are before you hear my tip? I'll start with you, Jeannie, and I'll work through. Jeannie, if you can start us off.
Yeah. You know, it's the hard conversations that matter. It's the open conversations, and it's the continuation of the conversation as we age, appropriate conversations from, you know, the young to the middle to the age. It's the continuation of the conversations. It's having the hard conversations, and it's opening up to have those conversations, but be willing to learn too. You know, we as parents, we don't know what your children are seeing. So learn from your children, ask what they're seeing, allow them to teach you in order for you to help them what they're seeing and guide them through this process would be my one key thing, if I could impart something to help.
Thank you, Jeannie. Great advice, as always. And I'm just going to work down here. We'll come over to you next, Simon, and we'll end with you, Andy.
So I'm just going to support what Jeannie's just said. We've just completed some academic research at the International Policing and Public Protection Research Institute, where we've interviewed, I think, 3,500 children and their parents. And the research results could not be clearer. Open, honest, ongoing conversations with your children. Be interested in what they are doing online. Make sure that they feel comfortable being able to talk about somebody approaching them they're not comfortable with, and just be there in a supportive fashion. And it is all around openness and honesty. And don't drive it underground, because if you drive it underground and they're taking their telephone off to the bedroom or to the toilet or the bathroom, whatever it is, and they're not talking openly and honestly about what their experiences are, the applications they're on, what they're being exposed to, then I think you have some real challenges ahead. Research is clear: openness and honesty.
Some more fantastic advice. Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Simon. We'll come to you, Andy and Dawn. We'll finish up with you. The question is, if you could give parents one tip for making their children safer online than they were before they got your advice, what that one tip would be. We'll come to you, Andy, and we'll come to you at the conclusion, Dawn. Andy, you're up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I echo what the others said. I would use 3 words: listen, learn, and understand. Obviously, listen to your child or a young person, you know, be there for them, you know, and everything like that. Learn about the technology, learn about the apps. You don't need to find out a great detail, but get to know what they are. You know, at least you know what that image is on a person's smartphone. Is it an app? Is it, you know, a game, whatever? And understand from, you know, an adult's perspective, we didn't necessarily grow up in this tech facilitated world like the youth of today are. So we do have to understand that this is their life. You know, God forbid the Wi-Fi goes down, let alone you take the smartphone off them. But, you know, we have to understand this is where they live, this is what they do. So we have to understand as well, and hopefully they understand it from a parental or adult perspective, carer's perspective as well. So listen, learn, understand.
Everyone, make note of that. Listen, learn, understand. Thank you, Andy. Some more great advice. And Dawn, we'll come over to you for the tip that you would impart on parents.
Well, I agree with everything you've all said, and that's going to help really, I think, to help in the immediate needs of protecting your kids online. But I also ask you to come help us change the current systems and demand that these tech platforms give us as parents more power, that they design with safety in mind from the very beginning, that they solve these problems. And you can reach out to these tech platforms or to your elected officials to demand more. Until there's more accountability and they're forced to be truly partners in this, then it's going to be such a hard fight for parents going forward.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm hearing a combination of what's become tech savvier and a lot of good old fashioned, Jeannie, the word used, I'm old school too, good old fashioned, old school parenting. Let's get a little more tech savvy. And again, I appreciate you saying, Andy, we don't need to be experts in these apps. I'm certainly not, but I know how to navigate basically, and that seems to be sufficient. I know at least that. And with Dawn's perspective here is doing what we were talking about here as parents, but also taking the initiative to embark a larger system level change. Because if we work together, I think we've said this a few times on the call, if we all come together, it might have been you, Dawn, if we all come together and collaborate and work as a team, we can do this. So I do want to say one more time, a big thank you to all members of our panel who took time out of their schedules to join us today. I want to say a big thank you to our audience as well. Thank you for joining our symposium on new and emerging online threats. I trust, pardon the pun, that you learned some new things today and found the time well spent. Thank you very much and have a safe and lovely day.